Hi, my name is Dan Zeilinger, and I have been a world-traveling full-time trad jazz musician for the past 40 years. Some of my most memorable performances were on the lawn of the Edinburgh Castle, at Imperial Palace in Japan, as well as TV shows and commercials across the world. I've met many people during my career and have spent many hours on stage and off with these musicians, talking about jazz, life, and more. Some are touring musicians, some are theme park warriors, and some are casual musicians who play on the weekends with friends. I think they all have stories worthy of a movie script, and through these interviews, I'll be sharing them with you. Hi there, this is Dan Zeilinger for Trad Jazz Today. My next guest is somebody who I've known way too long. He and his family have been intertwined in my musical experience, whether they liked it or not. And wonderful organist, a piano player, piano technician, a drummer. I believe he could probably tap dance and whistle a few tunes if you asked him to. And that is the fabulously talented Mr. Randy Woltz. Hi, Randy.
Hello.
How that interview work okay?
Yeah.
That introduction, rather?
Yeah, that works. It's all lies, but it works.
I always ask people that because sometimes I'll slip in something that they don't appreciate, and I think that's just tough. I see the map of the world there.
Yes. That was above my dining table. So that's how I would decide as I was eating breakfast, where do I want to go in the world next? So I remember pointing to Australia and go, I want to go to Tasmania. So last year I went to Tasmania. So it works. You just focus on what you want to do and you do it. So,
I've heard that. Somebody asked Paul McCartney if he'd ever thought of it, that he would be that successful. And he said, "Oh yeah." I dreamt about it nightly and sitting at the Johnny. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So hi.
Hello.
So were you born in Hollywood?
Yeah, it's actually Los Feliz. It was at the Griffith Park Maternity Home. So it was actually on Griffith Park Boulevard back in the days. Yes. But technically Los Angeles, Los Feliz area.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that surprised me because, of course, I know you as a Newport Beach kid.
Right.
But so when did the family move you to Newport Beach?
So we lived in Beverly Hills, Beverly Glen, Coldwater Canyon, and then we moved in '64 to Newport Beach. My father had a different company that he moved to, so he took the whole family with him.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about your dad for a minute because he was kind of a legend with all the people that we know in common. That he was quite an inventor and came up with some stuff that we probably wouldn't have survived the entertainment business without. Tell me about some of the stuff he did.
Well, in '55, he was the founder of the SPIE, which is Society for the Photographic Instrumentation Engineers. And so it's for people that do that kind of scientific work. And it started in our home back then. It's now a worldwide organization. So he did have a number of inventions and working with cameras and things like that. And so he did work with people in Hollywood on cameras and IMAX and all that. So now and then I go up to LA with him and sit with some of these guys like Doug Trumbull, who did the special effects for 2001. And we saw the tank where they did the, for Close Encounters, we saw this tank where they put in like ink and make it look like a tornado and all that. So it was kind of cool to see the special effects world up in LA. So my father was involved with film effects of Hollywood.
So you kind of grew up with all of these people that are held in high esteem in that area, and they were just guys that hung out at the house with your dad.
Yeah, or we go up there and visit with them. Yeah.
Wow, incredible.
One of my mother's friends from the '40s was, of course, I can't think right now. He wrote "Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square," Manning Sherwin. And so he was an American who had gone to England and did a hit show. But that was his one big hit song was that. And she worked with him. And I remember as a little kid hanging out with him. That's a beautiful song.
Absolutely. For a while, when I was young and foolish and a trumpet player, I tried to put together a little big band instrumentation, mostly off of Tom Kubis's books and other things.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan Baird offered to write me an arrangement, and that was the tune he picked.
Yeah.
And pretty song. You're absolutely right. It's takes some unexpected turns harmonically.
Mm-hmm.
But good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, now, what was your first instrument you played?
Piano. I started on piano when I was 7.
Who was your teacher?
It was the local church organist. And my mother was the soloist of the church, and so she asked the organist, "Do you teach piano? My son wants to take lessons." So I go over to her. This is when we were still living in Hollywood.
Okay.
So she took me over there. There's a little old Craftsman house, old upright piano, and started taking from her. But I was not a good student, did not practice, didn't like to practice, and I literally did nothing during the week. So I tended to fake it week after week after week. She was a nice older lady. She didn't scream at me or anything.
I've had students like you.
Yeah, so I was a pretty bad student. But then I got better in high school when I started. It became a part of me more in high school.
So your mom sang well.
Yeah, she was a professional soloist. She had worked in Hollywood in the 40s. She was in a number of movies and nightclubs. She was one of the Earl Carroll girls at the Earl Carroll Theater and Sunset. And she was absolutely beautiful. I've got pictures of her somewhere.
Was your father musical?
He did play the drums in high school. He was just like me. He played the drums in marching band in Wichita North High School. He was exactly the same as me, or I was exactly the same as him. I don't know. And then he played the drums as an amateur. In fact, he told the story about in Wichita, it's a dry state, in Kansas. And he said they'd be playing a club somewhere, and different people in the band, their job was to grab different parts of the drum set. So if they got a warning that the police were coming or something like that, different people would grab the hi-hat or the cymbal or the bass drum, and they'd be out of there in like 30 seconds.
She's it, the cops.
Yeah, I remember that. He told me about. And then he was in England during the war. He was in the Royal Air Force. He was a radio engineer.
Oh, my.
And one of the groups that he sat in with was a young guy named George Shearing. Young, blind, English. And then years later in New York, George remembered my father. So that was kind of cool. And we had a lot of George Shearing recordings. That's what I grew up with.
Wow. Yeah, of course, he had a very identifiable sound, George Shearing, that is.
I love that sound.
The way he voiced his right hand especially.
Right, yeah.
You know? Wow, neato. And so when did you guys actually make the trek to Newport Harbor? And in that day and age, it was the Toolies. I mean, when my parents moved up to Huntington Beach, it was during the deer farm was still there, and there was no freeway. So
yeah, that's true. I went to junior high nearby, and then I went to Harbor High. And of course, my older brother, Paul, was there, Larry Wright. A number of very talented musicians and filmmakers were already there before me. So you should interview Dan Barrett and my brother and Larry.
Well, I've tried to get Dan, and he hasn't replied, and Larry Wright refused. He said nobody wants to hear what I have to say.
Okay, then I'll tell you everything there is to know about Larry then.
But I know a little bit, but he's not offering up any stories, and I know that he's one of the major influences on the whole scene.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah. Because I played in my brother's Happy Jazz Band, and Paul was on bass sax, as I remember, and Larry was a very good drummer. And Larry never had any. I'm going to talk about Larry then. I'm going to embarrass him then, but he never had a lesson in his life that I know of. But he could play any instrument.
Still does.
And Marvin Hatley, who wrote for Laurel and Hardy back in the early 30s, same thing. He never had a lesson, didn't know how to write music, but he could play any instrument. And he could literally double track himself and play. So Larry was on drums, and then he wanted to play soprano sax. So then he asked me if I would play, and I was only 15 at the time, and I only knew how to play rock and roll. I had no idea how to play Dixieland. So the first few attempts to play with his band was pretty rocky, and I got yelled at. And I go into a wild drum solo, and I only know how to play in one tempo. And so the band would be playing in a certain tempo, and I just dived into another tempo, and the whole thing fell apart, and they didn't know when to come back in. I was horrified. So that was my first experience playing Dixieland.
You kept trying to play Inagata-Davida.
Or something, yeah. So, but they kept me on drums, and I kept playing, and sometimes I played piano. So those were my first experiences playing jazz. And it was mostly Dixieland, not really trad. We didn't know what trad was yet.
Sure. Well, I really don't distinguish between any of that on this channel.
Oh, that's good.
I'm just not calling it trad. I'm just calling it trad jazz, because the logo looks good, and because it's politically incorrect to say Dixieland anymore. So I should have just said early jazz, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the 50s, 60s, where it was straw hats, vests,
Shakies.
5'2", eyes of blue, girls dressed up in pseudo 20s, the TV shows at the time, that was the culture. It was all strictly Dixieland, 60s version of the 20s.
Mickey Finn.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
loved Joanne Castle absolutely loved her. And that was my first interest in that kind of music. She was so much fun to watch.
Oh,
She was,
absolutely fun to watch.
yeah. She made it look so much fun, and I couldn't wait to play that kind of music. So I asked my teacher if I could learn something like that too.
You know, I was fortunate enough to play with Big Tiny Little towards the end of his life.
Uh-huh.
And he was telling me that when Joanna auditioned for the show, she only knew one song.
Wow.
She only knew one rag. And of course, everybody's so taken with her smile and her enthusiasm that she got the gig. And then all of a sudden she had to go learn how to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how true
all that stuff is on YouTube. You can watch those old TV shows and watch her play,
Yeah,
So,
another thing that comes up on this show a lot is Lawrence Welk in that show. And everybody kind of sheepishly admits that, like I do, that it was the only show where you could see instrumentalists on TV at the time. So I watched them all the time.
Right.
I don't know. So when you, excuse me, I washed my mouth this morning. I can't do a thing with it.
That's right.
So yeah, that whole group of Orange County guys, of course, I didn't get introduced to them until '72.
Right.
And they're the ones who kind of escorted me along. But I know that you and I have known each other since about then.
Yeah.
First time we met, actually, of course, I met Paul and the Dixieland crew a lot earlier. But you and I met, of course, when you premiered your timpani symphony or piece for the orchestra.
Yeah, that was in '83. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Joe Napa on trumpet. I remember that.
Me and Joe Napa were playing trumpet, and I think maybe later on Matt Franke came into that orchestra, but yeah, it was me and Napa.
Yeah.
And I was impressed. First of all, I didn't know anybody would write a complete symphonic piece for solo timpani.
Yeah, why not?
and Perlman was cool enough to put it on.
Yeah. And then I did a concerto for orchestra and piano a couple of years later.
Well, see, as I researched you for this for our interview, I was interested to know that you had then later on had gone to Chapman for composition,
right?
And that you were a performance major at APU. Of course, you've told me that when I told you my son was graduating from there.
Oh yeah.
But tell me a little bit about being at Chapman in that program.
It's funny because when I was in high school and junior high, my first attempts at OCC, I was a terrible student, C and D student mostly. Other than music, I really had no interest in anything.
Me
but
too.
When as an older student, I went to Chapman. I loved it. I got A's and everything. It was a breeze. It was amazing. And so I was roped in by John Koshak to play in every single thing there. I mean, everything there. I mean, so I was doing like 20 units in 1 year with all the classes and everything. And I had a lot of fun. It was great. And then at night I was playing with Johnny Crawford up in LA.
Sure.
So sometimes I come to school with my tuxedo. My car was already full of all my drum stuff. And I get in the car and go all the way up to the valley, play with Johnny Crawford. So it was a long day. So that's how it was in the 90s.
From the story I've heard, I heard from Lee Westenhofer from Westy about the Crawford band. It must have driven you nuts at times.
No, I love Johnny a lot. He's
No,
not.
I mean, he's a great guy, but
yeah.
I understand that he didn't really have the highest musical IQ.
Well, he's someone that loves music. He knows what he wants, but he's kind of eccentric. And so he would tell the band weird things that didn't make sense musically and drive them crazy. But I understood him really well, and I would just kind of laugh. And he'd say, press rolls, press rolls. And he was constantly directing the band and arranging. And he and Westy got into it a few times, where Westy is a very, very, very particular kind of musician. And he got to look down on Johnny. Johnny, to him, didn't have the chops to tell him what to do. But I understood Johnny, and I love him. And Charlotte, his wife, and the whole family. They're wonderful people. So I enjoyed it a lot. I only think a couple of times he got mad at me, Johnny, where he was taking it out on me because of something else that was wrong. And I've had musicians do that, and I don't take it personally. So, but no, I always loved Johnny in all those years. He just kind of got worse and worse over the time. and got more eccentric. And now, unfortunately, he's not in shape, not in very good shape anymore.
For those that are watching that don't understand who and what that band was and who Johnny was as an actor, can you just give a quick synopsis?
Yeah, well, he was in the original season of the Mickey Mouse Club. He was one of the very first original kids in the Mickey Mouse Club when he was 9 years old. And then he was let go after the first year because it was a heavy dance show. And the kids like Bobby Burgess were natural dancers, but Johnny was not. And so later he made a number of movies after that and was on TV drama series. But his biggest fame was being on The Rifleman from 1959 to 63 with Chuck Connors. And so he played the son, Mark McCain. And that's, of course, all over the internet and all over TV right now. And it still has a huge fan following. And there's a whole thing about Johnny Crawford legacy, and there's a lot of pictures his family's putting out now. So his biggest fame was on that. And then he became friends with Hugh Hefner and made some films and projects with Hefner. And that's how I met Hefner and went and hung out at the mansion like years and years later. So, but Johnny is wonderful, but he's his own person. And us musicians would make fun of him, but that's just how he was. But he always knew what he wanted. He just couldn't explain it in musical terms.
How did he become such a fan of that early dance band music?
I don't know, because it was Larry Wright was actually playing with him up in LA. And he said, Johnny's doing this 1920s music. And I go, wow, that's weird. I thought he'd be doing country western, because Johnny was actually a rodeo star back in those days as well. He did the rope tricks and he did the, tying up the calf and all that stuff. He did a lot of rodeo stuff. But apparently, if you look him up, I think his grandfather was a publisher of music back in Tin Pan Alley days. And so he grew up with a lot of that music. And even as a kid, he loved silent films and he loved the music of the 20s, 30s. So it was his dream finally to put together a band of that music. And he did. He's got, I don't know how many books of that stuff. And I sold him some stuff that I had. And so now his wife doesn't know what to do with it all. But we had a huge library of, Duke Ellington, just everybody there was. Huge library of music.
And he actually attracted some really good musicians for that band. Some of the people that come to mind.
Oh, yeah. Well, John Reynolds, of course, had been with him since the beginning. He and John worked in did you ever talk to John? That's another person.
Well, I actually have an interview lined up with Ralph, and John's on my agenda.
Okay. So John played guitar for him. He's kind of like, Bing Crosby and what's his name on guitar. And so the two of them did acts and routines, and John's been with him for a long time. And Dan Weinstein, God, I don't know. And yeah, many times we'd have some of the best studio players playing with us up there, up in LA.
Yeah.
It was fun while it lasted.
I was just taking notes there. A reminder again to try to get on John.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are a lot more interested than I am. And they, like Dan Barrett, Larry, you gotta pin Larry down. But Larry is Larry, so I don't know what to say.
I send him a new email every other day or every week or so, saying everyone's talking. I don't think I've done an interview where he hasn't come up, and would you please reconsider? But I don't know. He's a lot of musicians are musicians because they don't consider themselves that eloquent. And I've had like Mike Baird. He think there'd be too much dead time. He said, and he's one of the most fascinating people I know in the genre. Mike Earls is afraid that he won't have anything to say, and a few of these guys. So it's unfortunate.
When I was in high school, I went to the Pizza Palace with Paul, Larry, I don't know who else, half the band that I was in, and it was the South Frisco band. It was like.
I talked to Dan Comans earlier.
Oh yeah.
And he talked about you guys at the foot of the stage.
Oh yeah. It was like a pilgrimage every time we go there, and the place was packed. And the band was amazing, and I'd never seen anything like that where they just had a guy playing washboard, and it was all like Lou Waters stuff. And I go, why don't they play anything I know? And so that was when we figure out there's this other music out there besides 5'2" Eyes of Blue and things
like Big Bear Stomp and I'm Going Hunting and those kind of things.
Yeah, that's when we first heard that kind of. And Robbie was on piano, Vince Saunders, Mike Baird. I absolutely loved his playing. his clarinet playing and his sax playing was just so authentic. Loved it.
Yeah, he still plays great. I get a chance to play with him every so often. When he's in town, Phil Andreen will grab him and do something, and I'll normally be on that. But and of course, he's come by and sat in at Curly's when he's in town too.
Oh, really? That would be fun.
Maybe, I guess not when you were there.
No.
But I'm glad that we're finally getting a chance to play. And this is almost kind of some of the most jazz you played is the Curly's sit-in, isn't it? Or
yeah.
You always told me that it really wasn't your gig.
You're right. Because after the Happy Jazz Band kind of folded in 70-something, I went totally into big band. And my hero was Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson. And then I started working for the OCC Jazz Festival. And year after year, I would mingle with some of the biggest stars they brought over.
Oh, yeah. Both you and your sister helped with that.
My sister was like in love with everybody, and they were in love with her. I mean, some of them don't know that she's even gone. I mean, I don't want to tell Alf or Kim Richmond, some of those guys, I haven't even told them yet. So, unfortunately, but yeah, there's so many pictures of her with her arms around Louis Bellson.
Oh, giant stars.
On and on and on and on and on. Oh, yeah. She was a big, big jazz fan. She hung out with Stan Kenton, Woody Herman. She traveled with Woody Herman. She was, what's his name? Trumpet player, what's his name? He had a 5-valve.
Oh, Don Ellis.
Don Ellis. She was his personal secretary, and she lived with him out in the valley. And she put together all of his pills for him and drive him around to studios. And so she was right in the middle of all that. She knew Conti Condoli, everybody there was. And Frank Rossellino, I loved him. He was a good friend. Unfortunately, that didn't turn out well. But
pardon me, I've got a guy going by with a weed whacker right outside my window here.
Yeah, so many major stars of the jazz world in the 70s. Yeah.
I don't think I really quite realized how spoiled I was because, of course, I was in the Orange Coast College program during that time also. And all those guys, I mean, that's where I met Alf. That's where I met Jerome Richardson and Connie Condoli and all those guys. And Cat Anderson came by once and played a concert with the OCC band. And we had all kinds of Rick Baptist.
Oh, yeah, I love Rick.
You know, he came up to the trumpet section, and I was playing lead that day. And he said, hey, man, I hope you don't mind. I want to set up with a section because I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm not really a soloist. And crazy, you know. It was a wonderful time. And and your sister, of course, was always very, very nice to me and somebody I could count on, and you guys.
Yeah.
Pretty phenomenal in that day and age. And like all of us, I was a big Buddy Rich fan. Did you go to the Ed Shaughnessy clinic when he was there?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, he talked about playing with his hands on the drum set and breathing with a section a lot in that clinic. I went to that.
I remember during one of the festivals, Shelly Mann came in, and we were horrified that he didn't bring his own drum set with him. He says, "Hey, I'll just play what you got here." And we were like, "You're kidding." It was like an old beat up Camco drum set in the band room. He says, "Yeah, it'll be fine, man. Just set it up." So he brought it out on stage in this beat up set that none of us would touch that drum set. It was so bad. It was like a little kid drum set practically. So Shelly had his own cymbals and his sticks. So he sat down, put his own cymbals on, and he sat down and he went, "Ding, ding, 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 ding." And we just sat there with our mouths open. He made that little crappy set sound like incredible. And from then on, I never made jokes about drum sets. It's the player, not the set, you know?
Yeah. Were you there when Buddy Rich showed up late?
Yes. I was backstage. I was the stage manager. I was the only OCC student there, and I can still remember like yesterday. It was very frightening, actually, because that was my first experience with a tornado. So, yeah. That was weird. So it was 1972, and the band, that was we always had a big concert at the end of the jazz festival, and everybody was in the audience. All the kids from all the bands are in the audience, right? And I'd watch them set up the band and Buddy's drum set and everything. And he didn't show up for quite a while. We didn't know where he was. And then finally, and I was there, and Steve Marcus was the one who got in a huddle, and he said, "Okay, why don't we put Donnie Osborne on the drums?" And Donnie and his father were the head of the Slingerland Drum Company at the time. And so Donnie was pretty good, but he wasn't Buddy Rich, but he was good. And so the band went out and they started playing. And I'm standing backstage, and these double doors open up, and it's Buddy Rich. And you should have seen the look on his face. He was like, I don't know how to describe it. He was furious. He just stood there. He went up to the edge of the stage. He went like this to the band. Everybody ran off stage. The audience didn't know what was going on. And he was back there yelling and screaming and threatening everybody for probably 20 minutes. I was scared out of my mind. He came up to me and said, "Did you have anything to do with this?" And he pointed his finger right at my face. And I was like, I couldn't even open my mouth. I mean, he was screaming and threatening everybody. All the wives and the girlfriends literally scattered. Nobody wanted to be near him. And he wouldn't go on until Dr. Rutherford gave him his second check. Because apparently the band got like a half check and then they got the other half at the end of the evening. So he stormed into the office. Rutherford wrote the check. And then it wasn't until Jimmy Lyons, who was the head of the Monterey Jazz Festival, the sweetest man on earth. And Jimmy realized that Buddy would not go on unless somebody admitted to whose idea was it to put the band on. And so Jimmy admitted to it, and it wasn't true at all. I saw what happened, but I wasn't going to say anything because Marcus would have been fired on the spot. He was pretty scary backstage. And then he started threatening Jimmy Lyons. He says, "I'm going to push your face through the wall." And it was, Jimmy was the sweetest man in the world. It was just heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah,
him.
he used to MC that concert, right?
Yeah. And so finally, Buddy went out and played flawlessly. He played absolutely flawlessly. I think he just loves the energy. And I was just shaking after that because I was so sure he was going to take the band and leave and there wouldn't be any concert at all.
Were you still a fan after that?
Yeah, no, I was like astonished at how well he played because when I get rattled, I can't play at all. And then the funny thing is that the sax player took his little 8-inch cymbal off the drum set and walked away with it because kids would jump up on stage and steal things. So they told me to go out on stage and watch the drum set. So the funny thing is all these kids crowded around the stage and were asking me all these questions like, "Does Buddy have a special drum pedal? Does he have a special snare drum?" And I would just make up answers, because I didn't know what to say. It was hilarious. So, but I guess it had happened where kids would jump up and steal things and take sticks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I saw him. I think it was the same year at Disneyland, like a few months later. And Buddy was sitting at a table with two other guys, and I said, "Hi, Buddy. Do you remember me?" And he looked at me and says, oh yeah, that's right. And then the other guys were laughing because they remembered the story too, but he was totally different. And so we talked for a while, and he was completely different. He was really, really nice. He was kind of embarrassed about the whole thing. But apparently he would blow up with the band and blow up at people quite a bit. And then a day later, everything was fine. So he just did that. He would terrorize the band. He would terrorize people. But for me, it was very frightening being 19 years old.
Well, I imagine. Of course, there's the famous recording of him calling out the band on the bus.
Oh, yeah.
I guess it was in New York. That's made its round around musicians, too.
Yeah.
I happened also to be in the audience when Toshiko Akiyoshi was there. And she got on stage and found out the piano wasn't tuned to her liking.
Yeah.
And stormed off the stage until they brought a piano tuner on to fix it.
Whoa. Yeah.
But that we got exposed to so many people. You more so than I did. But just being at Orange Coast College at that time got us. We managed to see some greats go through there.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. But now you've done I think the majority of your career now, or a lot of it, has been either with theater organ and playing it with movies, or you've done a lot of soundtracks too. I noticed that the one that surprised me, of course, was Super Mario Brothers.
I forgot about that. Yeah, I've arranged. I don't know. That was kind of weird. I've had a lot of weird projects I don't even remember now.
Well, I can freshen your memory. You were on the soundtrack for Young Warriors,
mm-hmm.
and you were on the soundtrack for Zombie High.
No, I was in the movie Young Warriors.
And Zombie High. So this is acting credits. Okay.
That's an acting credit, yeah.
How about Zombie High?
No, not Zombie High. Sorry, I don't know that one.
Oh, it was listed. You were attributed to it somehow.
Oh.
You played a drummer on the 13th floor.
Right. You can see me playing drums. Right.
My favorite is Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Oh yeah, I'm a photographer. I get a close up in the movie.
I saw it.
Yeah.
That's a great credit.
With Jason Alexander and Rene Russo right in front of me. And the flash on my camera didn't always work, so I was scared to death. But we finally got the scene and it was over. But it was kind of tense. So I'm right in front of these two stars and the camera's not working.
Just a little bit of trivia. Did you know that at one point in time, Doug Maddox dated Renee Russo?
No. Wow.
Just throw that out there. And then one of my favorite movies for a couple of reasons, and that is mainly Kirsten Dunst when you appeared in The Cat's Meow. It's a neat movie.
Yeah.
Pretty much about the Mabel Normand incident and those things.
Yeah, they never proved it that William Randolph Hearst apparently was trying to shoot at Charlie Chaplin on this boat, and he ended up hitting this director William Ince by accident, and then they hushed up the whole thing completely. And Marion Davies never proved it either. Nobody ever really proved it, but Peter Bogdanovich was a friend of Orson Welles, and Orson Welles knew the story better. So when Peter Bogdanovich made the movie, he was trying to insist that that was the real truth. So during the recording session, we got to have lunch with Bogdanovich, and I asked him a lot of questions about that. And it was pretty much with Ian Whitcomb. It was Ian and I worked on the soundtrack on that film, and it was all pre-recorded songs. But that was a good movie.
Yeah, and I'm such a fanboy of Kirsten Dunst. She's just lovely. Yeah, about Ian Whitcomb. So you've actually done a couple of recordings with him.
Oh, wow. Probably 4 or 5, 6. I don't even know. Plus arrangements. I did a lot of arrangements for him.
Well, you have a book out of ukulele tunes, don't you?
No, that would be Ian.
But you're credited on having some originals in there.
Oh,
I think.
Could be. I don't know. It's funny how these weird things are out there I don't know about.
Well, you better start paying attention,
yeah,
son. Get it correct in history.
Yeah.
You know. So tell me about Ian. I don't know anything about the man other than he's a wonderful talent.
Well, of course, he was a British star in '65. He had a hit called "You Turn Me On," and if you go to YouTube and you type in Ian Whitcomb, "You Turn Me On," you'll see him at his height. He had long hair. He was one of the British invasion types. And my sister and I heard him in concert with Chad and Jeremy in '65. And it was at the Melodyland Theater, which is long gone in Anaheim. It was a big theater on the Round. And he was amazing. The girls were screaming their heads off. You couldn't hear anything. And so that was the height of the whole Beatlemania British invasion thing. And then it was, I don't know how many years later, I started doing sessions with Janet Klein. And Ian was there, and Buster Fitzpatrick was there, John Reynolds, all these crazy people. And Ian and I hit it off right away, you know, and I started playing on his recordings from then on. And Ian has quite a few books about ragtime, about Irving Berlin. He's an expert on Tin Pan Alley, or was an expert on Tin Pan Alley. But he had a bad stroke about 5 years ago, and he just kind of got worse and worse, and he passed away a few months ago. But I absolutely loved him, and I miss him a lot.
I hadn't heard. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Of course, like you said, you mentioned Janet Klein. Now, I've heard a lot of Buster stories too.
I like Buster, but you have to be real careful around him. That's it.
So I heard.
Yes.
I think I've only seen him once in a performance. But
now, what's weird about Buster? He has, I think, Tourette's syndrome, but he has his perfect memory. And so I played with him and Dan Barrett at this pizza parlor in Wilmington. This is like 1973, 74. And Dan didn't have any lead sheets at all. And it was all pure, trad jazz stuff. I didn't know anything they were doing. And then Dan would call a tune. I go, I don't know that. What do you mean you don't know that? Everybody knows that. And so it was a bad evening. But Buster was on bass. And I somehow got through the evening. I don't know. But I was disgusted. I said, I'm not going to play this music anymore. And then the weird thing is I'm playing a recording session with Janet, and this is probably 7, 8, 9, probably 25 years later. And as soon as Buster sees me, he goes, oh yeah, I remember you. You were with Dan Barrett at this Pizza Palace in Wilmington, 1974, and you did this and this and this and this and this. And I thought I was the only one that had that kind of memory. It was weird. Just a brilliant bass player, but crazy, just crazy guy.
So you've got a really accurate memory.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I guess that's unfortunate. I don't, and it's bit me in the butt a couple of times. So how did you end up getting hooked up with Janet Klein? I know that You've done a lot with her.
Let's see. Well, I was playing with Johnny Crawford, and then she was part of that whole retro scene, and she had already made one CD, and she was really good friends with John Reynolds. So that was the connections probably through John and Brad Kay and those guys. I don't know if you know Brad. And so Janet and I hit it off really well. And she was absolutely a lovely person. She was still married to Andy, her first husband. And we just started working together, and I started playing with her at the Atlas up in LA. And there was no music, no lead sheets, no nothing. And so the band was all playing by ear. It was like Tom Marion, John, and some other guy on
I
violin.
remember Tom Marion, sure.
And they would play by ear because they didn't want to read music. And so they would play all these really obscure tunes I'd never heard of, and then say, "Randy, take a solo." And I was on xylophone or something like that. So I literally would just start playing in the same key, and I didn't know what I was doing. And the audience loved it anyway. And so that's how that worked. And then over time, I started creating lead sheets for her because I said, as you get different people in the band, and the bass player was totally lost. He didn't know what was going on either. And so over the years, I've helped her put together a pretty big book of lead sheets because she's had all kinds of guys playing with her over the years and get it more organized, because otherwise it was like a big free-for-all. It was like the Mad Hatter Tea Party on stage, and people would get into a fight on stage. And so I play with Janet. She's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah,
Many
I'm sorry,
CDs.
go ahead.
I think I've done 8 CDs with her, and the last one I did all the arrangements, all the band arrangements with Dan Levinson, Jeff Nudell, people like that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I was just saying that a lot of those kind of acts, and there are a lot of them, where they put either they don't have lead sheets, or the ones they have been altered throughout the years by people who are just sitting in.
Right.
And I've come on bands as a sub where they'll put a book in front of me and none of it will apply. There'll be a coda there, or there'll be a key change, or there'll be something will be scratched out and something else have arrows pointing somewhere.
Yeah.
And so kudos to you guys who try to, herd these people into niceties for the people who are sitting in.
I mean, there were times when I'd be in the dressing room with John Reynolds, and he'd be playing the chords, and I had this piece of scratch paper, and I'm quickly writing out the chords to the song that I'm supposed to be featured in about 5 minutes. And so I still had the pencil scratch and the weird stuff like that. And gradually we replaced that with real lead sheets. But that's how it was in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let's talk about some of your original compositions you've done. And just in general, you've done a lot because you like to compose.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me some of the works you've done for large groups and small groups and jazz groups and shows. And
I wrote for the big band when I was at OCC. Tom Kubis and I were in the same class, and he was writing a new chart every week, and I'd write one like every 3 weeks. And it was a great experience copying and having the band play what you just wrote. And then I got to the point where the band, it sounded exactly like I thought. And that's when I realized that I started to know what I was doing. And I'd hear what other people were doing. So I wrote a piece called The End of Time. It was a concerto in 3 movements. And I later gave it to Louis Belson. He wrote me a really nice letter. And it's a drum feature. And then I wrote, like I said, the piece for timpani and orchestra. And I wrote a piece, it was a piano concerto. It was about 30 minutes long that I did with the OCC Symphony. But it doesn't have that much piano, so I call it a concerto for orchestra and piano, not piano and orchestra.
I see.
Anyway, and then some works for choral music, organ music, band. I've written some things for band. Dan Baird wanted me to write a marching band arrangement of Emperor Norton's Hunch. That was an interesting story.
You have some of those still. I remember you and I talked about the fact that you had a marching band book that you've done of sorts.
Yeah, well, I just had that one, and it was a flip folder version of the Emperor Norton's Hunch. And so to be correct, I actually wrote to Lou Waters back then and said, "Who has the copyright on this?" And he says, "Well, not me, because I sold it to Contemporary Records when they started recording the band in the late 40s. So I called Contemporary Records and talked to Les Koenig, and he's the guy that, did all the Firehouse 5 albums.
Uh-huh.
You can see that. This is my favorite album from when I was like 9.
There's actually still grooves in it?
Oh my God, this thing's falling apart and beat up. But I memorized this entire record. I think my brother and I played this 10,000 times. But anyway, the guy that produced that, I talked to him, and we made a deal. And so I eventually published a marching band version of Emperor Norton's. And it's been played by a few like concert bands and stuff like that, but nothing much else.
For those of you who are listening to this and watching this interview, we make references to Randy's brother Paul, and he's another one of these stalwarts of the early jazz movement that came out of Southern California. And of course, he's now living up north, and he was long times with Baird and the Uptown Lowdown Jazz Band, and plays everything. Also, another one of those guys. And I just wanted to throw that in there because, believe it or not, we probably have, actually, I know we have a few people that are actually watching this from Europe and Japan and other places.
Wow.
So it's kind of nice.
Wow. Okay.
Just want to make sure. One of my interviews, I mentioned Westy, and I said, if you're watching this and you don't know who Westy Westenhofer is, I'm surprised you're watching this. So
he was a genius. I loved Westy because I remember when he was at the Golden Horseshoe in Disneyland, and he was a comedian, bass player, tuba player, and he was the one that would do the puns. Okay, that's where I got it from. He would literally, during his solo, he could squeeze in 3 or 4 songs in his bass solo. And I remember playing a private party with him. I think it was at a friend's house, and I was on drums, and Westy and I was having so much fun listening to him. And I think Doug Maddox was on banjo or something, and just listening to Westy was so entertaining. So yeah.
Well, that's kind of where I get it too. You know, as you know, sitting behind me, unfortunately, that I have this propensity for quoting.
Yeah.
You know, as well as so do you, of course.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Now let's talk about the tunes you've written for the Curly's band. I love those personally.
Oh, yeah. There's quite a few of them now. There's Moonlight and El Segundo. That's my favorite song.
It's a great song. It's a good song.
Words and lyrics by me. And then there's a number of others. The other one that was embarrassing to Larry was it's Corey's Fault.
I like Up Where the Sun Don't Shine.
Oh, that. Yeah, I don't know why that's kind of crude, but it's funny, I guess.
And you wrote one for Marlis.
Yeah, it's called Marvelous Marlis, the Sweetheart of Signal Hill. And some of these ideas I got from overhearing other people's conversations, like Phil Andreen said something about Marvelous Marlis. And then I realized, hey, that would make a good title. And then one time we were playing with the South Burgundy. I think it was in Pismo Beach. And Corey is another one you should interview too. I don't know.
Yeah, he's coming on. He's already agreed.
Good. Yeah, he's great. Very talented photographer too. And we were at Pismo Beach, and I think he forgot to show up to he got the wrong time, and he just didn't show up at all. And then when he did show up, he was all confused. And we were playing one of those complicated charts where it starts here, then it goes here, then it goes back here.
Right, Wolverine or one of those things.
And so he did something weird, and the band kind of fumbled. And then somebody said, "Oh man, it's Corey's fault. You know, that's why we got off." And so I thought, hey, that'd make a good title. So I wrote a song about that too.
Yeah, you and I also played on the Dean Moira band once.
Oh, really?
Dean Moira, Modern Eras.
Really? I don't remember him.
You were on drums. John Reynolds was on guitar and banjo, and I was trying to play string bass and tuba. And of course, even at the height of my string bass playing, I wasn't a string bass player. And I looked down at the charts, and he had real bass charts with black notes,
right,
and no changes. And I sweated through my tuxedo, and John Reynolds was just laughing at me the entire gig.
Oh.
I made the gig okay, but I was literally sweating through my tuxedo, trying to play that book.
I think one advantage is that I'm a highly classically trained organist and pianist and drummer. So I can move with, in a symphony orchestra, or I can play jazz. And I think I would tell any young person, you absolutely have to have both. You have to be a really, really good reader, because you never know what you're going to get thrown into.
Oh, well, it really helps, especially if you start doing studio stuff like you've done.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you saw the Les Deutsch interview, which you said you saw, right?
Yeah.
Of course, he mentions you, and I mention you, because he's dipped his toe into the silent movie film accompanying business, and you've done a lot of that.
Well, not a lot. I did play at the Silent Film Theater in LA on Fairfax. And I played at Plummer Auditorium when they did some silent movies and concerts. And I played with Mike Henneberry's band. It was a 20s, 30s band. So yeah, I love the Wurlitzer. I love playing at Old Town Music Hall. And unfortunately, Bill Field, the founder, passed away about a month ago, I guess. And he was wonderful, wonderful guy. And the theater's closed now, unfortunately, but they have a beautiful Wurlitzer there. And so I would play there with Janet Klein. And I love playing for silent film. Yeah, and there was a church in Monrovia. It's a large church in Monrovia, and they hired me to play for silent films in the church. So they would put on like a Dorothy Gish, movie or something like that, and I would play on the church organ, and it was fun. Yeah, I like doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, one of my other interviews, I don't think it was Les, was mentioning the fact that all of these theater organists, quite few, that of course Fats Waller, I guess, was the theater organist, and so was Count Basie.
Oh, really? I didn't remember that.
I didn't know that either. And and then we started talking about Randolph Scott, which I guess that was Les that did that.
And Raymond Scott. You mean Raymond Scott?
Raymond Scott, and the fact that a lot of the cartoon composers were also theater organists.
Oh, probably because in their day that was the way to make a lot of money in the 20s. So even classical organists, they do 4 shows a day, and so they were making a lot of money back then. Raymond Scott never wrote for cartoons, but Warner Brothers bought his library. He sold it all, and then he didn't even know that his music had been used for cartoons because he was way above that. He never watched cartoons. There's a great Raymond Scott. I don't know if Les knows about it. He probably does. There's a great documentary. And Raymond Scott got into electronic music in the 50s, and he built this whole machine. They would play random electronic music, and it was crazy stuff. There's some guys in LA that are absolute experts on that stuff, and Raymond Scott's son lives in New York, and he knows, still has all of that music and everything else. And there's like several CDs of that now.
Yeah, Les was surmising it. The reason a lot of those guys made the transfer from being a theater organist into writing for film and cartoons was because they'd already been doing it as solo artists,
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think it's just really fascinating. And to watch a screen, I did a couple movie sessions when I was younger where we would record everything on live. In other words, we'd watch the screen and time it to the screen rather than having a SMPTE track or anything.
Right.
And I can't imagine doing that as just a matter of course in those days.
Yeah, I had to learn how to do punches and streamers. So you're watching the screen and you're playing. But then what I did when I was in charge was I did click tracks with headphones because it was so much easier to keep everybody on track because my conducting wasn't that great as far as keeping right on the beat. So
Yeah.
I use click tracks, not punches and streamers. But now it's electronic, and so it's quite different today.
Yeah, Alf Clausen's actually the one who taught me about having a SMPTE track.
Yeah.
And aligning things that way.
He used to let me go to 20th Century Fox and watch him conduct like Moonlighting and Alf, and then later when he did The Simpsons, and I would see all these other people there and got to be friends with some of these other people. Yeah.
Yeah, he actually invited me to the one moonlighting session where it was a dream sequence. They went back to medieval times.
Oh, okay.
And he was using all authentic instruments for it, and he thought I'd get a kick out of it and invited me up for that session.
Yeah.
But just craziness.
Mm-hmm.
Randy, this has been fun, man. I think I have a feeling you kind of dreaded doing this interview.
Yeah, because I never know if I have anything to say either,
Oh, well, you had plenty. And okay. In fact, I'm getting to the end of our time here and want to give you a chance to plug anything as far as, is your music available? Where can people hear some of the stuff you've done? Do you have a website?
No. I'm unlisted. So
does Janet Klein have a website?
Yeah. Go to Janet Klein or Ian Whitcomb, and all of my stuff that I did with them is there. And you can download, I think, iTunes. All of the arrangements I did with Janet Klein are available. You can listen to. So yeah, everything is out there. There's even stuff on YouTube with me. I've recorded a lot with Ian Whitcomb and different people. Yeah, it's all out there.
I don't know if you know this. I had actually flown a couple of slideshows on another YouTube channel called Daniel E. Zeilinger, and I have some of the Curly stuff that Mike Olson recorded for his own use. and I flew it in over slideshows of the pictures they've taken of the club. So you're in a bunch of those,
Oh, good. Okay.
and that's another place where people could hear kind of what we did at Curly's, among other things. But just to let you know, and let folks know.
Oh, good.
So when we get out of this time of not playing, which has got to happen eventually, I don't see any way it could continue like this for another year. I hope to get a chance to play with you some more.
Oh, thank you. You too. Yeah.
I've always enjoyed our time together. Musically, if nothing else, we tend to want to try to crack each other up, and I appreciate that.
Uh-huh. That's right.
All right, Randy, you take care now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for watching Trad Jazz Today with Dan Zeilinger. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Videos come out every Wednesday and Friday.